Hello, I'm Aneta Marren.
And I'm Carole Macdiarmid. We're in English for Academic Study in the School of Modern Languages and Cultures. And we're going to talk to you today about our project on transforming feedback to transform learning. You'll see a lot of names on here. This is a staff-student project with a partnership project with students from our MEd and MSc TESOL. Students are busy doing their dissertations just now, so though they've contributed, they're not actually. Aneta and I will do the presentation. As I said, it's a small-scale evaluation of the feedback practices on the MEd and MSc TESOL. It's a staff-student collaboration. Here are some of our team. Obviously, part of this project's been done via Zoom. In the talk, I'll give you an introductory background to the context, the programs that we work on, and briefly on feedback. Examples of our feedback and assessment and feedback practices, so where we build in opportunities for formative feedback particularly, and peer feedback now. We'll give you an overview on the main project aims, and then Aneta will talk you through the methodology, how we designed it, the participants that we gathered data from, and how we adapted it, because in the middle, COVID came. We'll also give some of the highlights of the findings and discussion, and our own staff and student reflections, staff student researcher reflections on the project. So the context for this is two TESOL, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages programs. We have an MSc and an MEd. They share some courses, but the MSc is small to medium postgraduate taught. It's around 40+ students and growing. They're all new or fairly new to TESOL. Most are new to postgraduate study and straight out of university as well, a lot from the Far East, but not exclusively. The MEd has a more varied profile of students from a range of countries. All have been working, so they've been out of education for or university education for some time. It's 15 to at most 20, so it's a small postgraduate course. For most, it's a 1-year intensive program. There are some part-time students, but they're usually juggling work. And they very much have to hit the ground running. One of their first assessments comes in about week 6. So feedback, the importance of feedback, whether summative or feedback formative, is well attested in the literature. As Weaver said, it's an essential component in the learning cycle, providing for reflection and development, or should. It's an opportunity to provide feedback on learning, but also for learning, so that it can transform and contribute to future learning as well. In our feedback practices, and we do a lot of work on trying to make it as helpful as possible, we try and make the constructive alignment visible, so lining up the intended learnings of the course, the content, and the final assessment, so that students can see how everything is connected. I'm going to show you some examples soon of how we do this. We scaffold through assessment familiarization tasks. They might be workshops, exemplars, online resources, and we're trying very hard to promote engagement with the tasks and the learning. And this is where the formative feedback that we'll talk about in a few minutes will come in. In terms of familiarization and scaffolding their work towards their final summative assessments, a typical series of tasks will have a focus on the intended learning outcomes and the criteria and how they link to the assessed tasks. Students will be given either previous examples that students have given us permission to use, or extracts to view and then mark, that try and assess themselves, and then compare with lecturer feedback. This can be through a workshop, a face-to-face or a Zoom workshop, or on some courses we use a Moodle book series of interactive tasks. We also have some online resources to support students as well. In terms of the summative feedback, we have the overall comment on the success of the assignment. We've also developed tick boxes. This is partly because we found we were writing an awful lot, which is quite time consuming, but also writing the same things one of the advantages we found of the tick box is that it also provides a visual representation of the key achievements in relation to the intended learning outcomes. Assignments will also get, each student will get individual in-text comments. However, we also wanted to start providing more formative feedback and get students to engage with the learning process as they go along. So we've been front-loading feedback more. Feedback should be for the purpose of development. And also, as Nicol says, if students are to learn from feedback, they must have opportunities to construct their own meaning from the received message. So we're trying to think of how we can get students engaging with the feedback more. More recently, we've also been including more peer feedback, peer formative feedback. Again, from Nicol, research indicates production and receipt of feedback can enhance students' learning. So we've got production and producing the feedback and receiving without necessarily increasing teacher workload. Depending on how you use it, there's still obviously can be an element of that. So how does this work for us? Well, I'm going to talk you through a number of examples of how we try and constructively align the class work and final assessed tasks. First is from the description. So this is a course that everyone takes. So 60 plus students. The first assignment is a text analysis. And so in class, they have parallel tasks. So they're doing task in class or after a lecture and workshop, which they then write up in groups, which will be the same type of task, but a different text to the final assignment. They get lecturer group feedback, and it's group partly because we get them to do this each week. It's a large group, and to manage this, we can give 5 or 6 group sections of feedback, but not 60. For that assignment, they also have a model extract, which is based on earlier work that they've done. We've developed frequently asked questions based on usually previous year's work, but which then get added to. Then they give their final assignment and lecturer feedback. The lecturer feedback is obviously the individual, but there are general and specific generic feedback. So the specific to the assignment and ones that can be transferable. It's a lot of work on this, but this is their first assignment. And as I say, it's in the middle of semester 1. The second example is from Classroom Processes. That's an MSc course, so around about 40 plus students. And they do journal entries as one of their assignments. To prepare for that, they have an assignment workshop. They have a reflective writing workshop. The assignment workshop will look at examples, again, frequently asked questions. We have an online resource for this, the Transition to Academic Writing WordPress, where we've got example assignments and lecturers talking through the strengths of the assignment in relation to criteria. Students then select one of their entries that they've been preparing and submit it to Europa. This is, if you're not familiar, a very handy tool which allows you to add rubrics and manually or randomly assign students for peer review. You put the link right into your Moodle. Students provide peer formative feedback, and then for this course, the lecturers write some generic feedback after sampling a number of assignments. They then have the final submission and get lecturer feedback on that. The third example is from a small course. It's an MEd core course. Again, they do parallel tasks. So for example, assignment 1 is based on an observation. They do a lecture or post-lecture class where they write up a reflection and commentary of a recorded lesson and get lecturer feedback. They have an assignment workshop, again looking at samples, different parts of assignments, and mark this. They then select a section of a draft of their assignment for peer formative feedback and do this again via Europa. For this, they're also provided with exemplar grades, so a very good assignment will include, and it has very specific details in relation to the assignment intended learning outcomes. After the peer feedback, they then get lecturer formative feedback. This tends to be confirmatory, really. Very occasionally, we might redirect something from peer feedback, but this hardly ever happens. Mostly it's to agree with the peer feedback because it's usually pretty accurate, maybe to highlight some additional points. And then there's again the final lecturer feedback on the individual assignments. Final one is from a Teaching English for Academic Purposes course. This runs online and face-to-face, and because it's online, this is when we started using Moodle books. So they have a series of interactive tasks looking at sample assignments, grading. They have a Zoom question and answer workshop and FAQs. Again, they put individual drafts, full drafts, or as much as they wish, into a ROPA and have peer formative feedback. They have quite a lot of scaffolding through the Moodle book, so we don't add lecturer feedback here. And again, we get to the final submission and individual feedback. We get good feedback. We put a lot of work and time and effort into our feedback, and we get good results from PTES, from the external examiners, and general feedback on student EVIS's service. But we don't really know too much about what they really think and what they particularly favour, because we have a range of approaches, what they see as effective, and what contributes to their future learning, because what we want to do is support worthwhile learning. So these are the overarching questions for our project. What are students' perceptions? And what's the impact of feedback on their learning? We also wanted to involve students in this. We've been inspired by staff-student partnerships that we've seen reported on at the L&T conference. And so we made a call for participant researchers via Moodle. We got 6 volunteers. 1 was actually interested in a different area of assessment. And so we have 3 for the MEd and 2 from the MSc who've been with us all the way through to the end in some format. Aneta is now going to talk you through the design process and our findings.
Okay, thank you, Carole. So let me just share my screen with you. Okay, so I'll tell you now about the process of our project. So there were 6 main stages. First, in the first meeting, we met with the students and we discussed our understanding of feedback. We discussed types of feedback the students receive on both programs and discussed what works and what does not work. Also, we talked about our roles in the project and then shared our ideas together. The follow-up to the first meeting was reading around the topic of feedback, and with the aim of identifying the main areas we would like to research. The students researchers have selected an article by Weaver in which she discusses the value of feedback that students receive. And then we used, this article has been a basis for our survey that then we designed. We used Google Documents where students could add their ideas, share their comments, and add feedback, add questions that they would like to be asked in the survey. We then met together and we discussed what we wanted to include in the final survey. The survey was then piloted for accuracy and also to estimate the time that was needed to complete it. Our survey initially was open for 2 weeks. However, as the response rate was quite low, we decided to reopen it for a further 2 weeks. And altogether, we received 16 responses to our survey. When we were analyzing our data, we have met with the students and we organized 2 parallel discussion groups. I worked with Carole and we're analyzing data from our point of view, and then students met at the same time in a different breakout room where they were discussing the data. Then we met again and we collated our results of the discussion. In the final stage, we reflected on the project and we used creative methods and visual representation, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it later on. Okay, so let's move on now to a very important aspect of this project, that is partnership. So how did we ensure that the partnership with the students worked? So one of the very first factors that we considered when we started this project was the power relationship between ourselves as members of staff and the students. And being aware that very often in traditional educational setting, this relationship tends to be unequal, we followed Brookfield's advice and we made the implicit things explicit. So we started the meetings with the students by discussing our role, our expectations from the project, and we discussed how our role in this project is going to be different from the roles that we normally take in the classroom. We also tried to have an ongoing dialogue with the students, and when meeting and discussing findings or preparing a questionnaire, we always made sure that the students' voice was heard before ours so that we're not affecting their input. Okay, so let's move on now to our methodology. So our initial plan was to collect data through the adapted questionnaire from the Weaver's article, which was selected by students researchers. And then we were hoping to organize a student researcher-led focus group. And this, as Carole argued, helps to generate more and richer data. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic and the fact that most of our students were either traveling back home in quarantine, we did not receive enough responses, and we adapted our plan. And the revised plan included a questionnaire and then a staff and student self-reflection on the project. The questionnaire included 37 questions. The first part, and they were, we used the Likert scale, so students would indicate their responses by indicated whether they strongly agree with the statement or completely disagree on the scale from 1 to 5. The first part of the questionnaire focused on general perception of feedback. This was followed by a section on formative feedback and summative feedback. There was also one open-ended question at the end of the survey in which students could give their suggestion on how to improve feedback. We, as mentioned before, we had 16 students have responded to our survey. There were 12 students from the MSc TESOL program and 4 students from the MEd TESOL program. So what have we found out? So there's quite a lot of positives. Students indicated that most of them understand feedback that they received, and they value and understand the assessment criteria. They find them useful. Students also appreciated positive comments, and they said that it helped them to boost their confidence. With negative comments, there were mixed responses, but it was good to see that a lot of students treated negative comments as constructive, helping them to improve their work. Some of the students indicated that negative comments were quite demotivating. However, what we found was when looking at the results, that there was the disconnect between the comprehension and the action. So while the students indicated that they understand feedback that they receive, they also said that they don't often apply this feedback to their future work. And obviously this is one of the main aim of our research, to look at the kind of transforming nature of feedback. So looking at whether students can apply it in their future work or not. So this is something that we'll be looking at in the future and looking at the reasons behind that. So students also said that they're willing to take part in peer feedback tasks, but they said that they value the feedback that they receive from teachers more than peer feedback, and they're more likely to then apply it in the future work. Students also said that they would like to have an opportunity to discuss feedback with lecturers and peers. So after they have received their feedback on their final work, they would like to have a chance to then talk about it, to help them understand it. In the open-ended questions, in the suggestions for improvement, the students indicated that they would like to have some training on giving peer feedback. They would also appreciate a workshop which leads to the previous comments on after the assignments have been marked, so opportunity to again discuss it. And some of the students would like to have an option to receive feedback in a different mode. So not only written, but maybe spoken as well. So when we're looking at the results, discussing them with students, looking at the literature, we obviously looked, first of all, at the important aspect of feedback, that is kind of the transforming nature. And this is something that we need to investigate further to find the reasons behind that. So what are the reasons why students do not apply feedback in their future work? The other thing that we will be looking at is the feedback conversation. So it seems that students, while they understand feedback, it seems to be more of a one-way conversation. So they receive feedback and then they don't always necessarily know what to do with it. So we'll be looking maybe at applying feedback request forms when giving formative feedback, where students can indicate which areas they would like to receive feedback, so they'll feel that this is more of a dialogue between students and teachers, and this hopefully can lead then to increasing the effectiveness of the feedback. When it comes to peer feedback, when analyzing this with the students' researchers, what we have found is that the students value peer feedback. They especially appreciated and enjoyed the task of giving peer feedback to others. They said it helped them to understand the criteria of assessment and the task that they had to complete. So it was a very good learning experience for them. However, they said that when they were receiving feedback, it was not always of a good quality, and they sometimes also did not know how this feedback could be given. So they would like to have more opportunities and training on giving peer feedback to make it a more effective learning experience. Okay, so this leads us to one of the final stages of the project, that are reflections. So as I've mentioned before, we used creative methods in this part, and we used the visual representation. The students were given a task to complete, in which they were asked to visually represent their participation in the project. We believe that using this form of reflection could give us a little bit more freedom to express our feelings about the process. So in the task, the students and ourselves, Carole and myself, were asked to draw either a river, and then imagine that each and every bend of the river indicates an important part of the process, or just do a freestyle drawing in which they visually represent their experience, and they could add any words and key ideas to annotate. So if we have a look at the first one, we can see that there is this feeling of sharing ideas, cooperation, and there are also comments of very positive comments of feeling involved, feeling improved. The second picture shows a river with quite a few important bends, but there is a very significant part at the very bottom, which is the COVID dam, stopping the flow of the ideas, the flow of the river, but then continues when we move to the online delivery of the project. Then we have this picture of climbing a mountain, so a challenge, which finishes off with a very positive comment and feeling empowered. Moving on to the next picture, we can see this idea of a teacher-student cooperation with question marks, not necessarily knowing how it's going to work. And then the idea of cooperation and co-constructing ideas, leading to opening up new questions and leading to future investigations. And then we have, again, the picture of a river with quite a few bends, indicating a lot of activities around the points where we were collecting data, piloting questionnaires. And then the COVID comes in as well here, stopping the flow of the river, making it a little bit slower, so making kind of the project slowing down, but then continuing and finishing off with very positive ideas of the experience being rewarding and interesting. So if we were to summarize the participation, we had a lot of, before starting the project, there were a lot of feelings of curiosity, not knowing how it will look like, how we are going to do, what we are going to learn. The feeling of a doubt and challenge, uncertainty, and feeling nervous as well. While we were working on the project, there was this feeling of the project being a challenge, but also partnership. So this idea of working together, cooperating, co-constructing ideas, and curiosity, trying to see what we can learn from each other. And the lockdown came in, kind of slowing the momentum of the project a little. When it comes to the feelings at the end of the project, so there was this feeling of pride, empowerment, feeling involved. Again, curiosity, because as I've mentioned before, there were some new ideas that came up, which will lead hopefully to future investigations. The sense of achievement and learning experience. And when talking to the students, researchers, they've all mentioned that they really enjoyed the experience. And even though initially they had a lot of doubts, they felt that it helped them to improve their confidence, and they've learned a lot of transferable skills they can then apply in their future jobs. So let me now just summarize the main points from our project. So what we've learned from this project and what we have gained. So I think one of the most important aspects was getting this an insight into students' perceptions of feedback, because we often give feedback to students and we don't really know what they think, what they find useful or not in the feedback that they have received. I think we have a better understanding of which aspects of feedback work and which do not work, and we are going to work on the idea on certain points in the future. So for example, peer feedback, will trying to make it more effective. And it helped us to identify areas for further investigation to help us improve feedback even more. It was a great learning experience working with students. We've learned a lot from them. They said they've learned a lot from us. And it was also a very good challenge for us as teachers to challenge our assumptions of what effective feedback is. So that's all for our presentation. And if you have any questions or would like to get any further information on any of the points that we have discussed today, please feel free to contact us. Here are our email addresses, and here is a reference list to our project. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and goodbye.
Thanks.